I recently had the opportunity to go view the total solar eclipse that recently happened here in North America. It wasn't exactly a trip that was primarily for that reason, but it was one of the perks of the trip. And this was not my first solar eclipse either. I had seen one in 2017, but this one had a lot more of an impact on me because since 2017, I'm completely changed. In 2017, I was a freshman at Penn State University, a kid from Connecticut who didn't really have too many friends, didn't know anybody really at that point in time. Classes had already started, but at this point in time, I didn't have any real close friends. My girlfriend at the time, my now wife, was long distance. She was in Rhode Island going to school as well. And I was trying to figure out my classes. I was trying to figure out my life. And I was in this one astronomy class. And our first assignment in the class, because this is early August, one of the assignments was to go view the solar eclipse. So I went and I saw it alone. And it was cool. And at the time, I was kind of interested in how that worked. And so I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Flash forward to now, 7 years later. Not only was my experience a lot better, mostly due to it being a total solar eclipse. The one in 2017 that took place in State College, Pennsylvania, was a partial eclipse. It was not total. This one recently I saw in very far north New York was a total solar eclipse. And as a result, I had a much more positive experience with this one and a much life-changing experience with this one as well, because in these past 7 years, since that first solar eclipse, I have been completely engulfed. And my outlook on my life, outlook on my place in this planet and my place in the universe has completely switched. This was not a topic that I really even cared about back in 2017. Fortunately, now I understand just how important these events are to witness, and just to keep us in check, to realize, whoa, we're actually on a planet. Nothing in this life is guaranteed, and you have to make each and every single day as good as it can be, because at the end of the day, you don't have control over things like this. We don't have the ability to rewind and stop the solar eclipse. It's going to happen at that time, whether you're there or not. It does not matter. It's going to happen, and it's going to go with or without you. And like many things in life, I think it's a really good explanation for how our life goes. Time does not stop, doesn't slow down, doesn't speed up unless you're traveling close to the speed of light, which is a different conversation. But life does not stop. Life continues on, and the pendulum swings continuously. And seeing this event was one of the coolest things, and I'll talk about it more later in my personal experience. But on today's podcast, I really wanted to discuss a broader picture of what is a solar eclipse? Why does this really even matter? Also, I'm going to talk about specific things like specific solar eclipses that happened long ago, including the first couple that are discussed. I don't think there is one distinct one that we can 100% say is an actual the first one, but we're going through recorded history of a couple famous ones and a couple early ones as well, so we can kind of get an idea of how long this stuff has been tracked and just how important it's been to older civilizations that have come and went. older times of people whose lives are generations upon generations removed from where we are today in 2024. People who have no similarity to us almost culturally, certainly in language, and certainly in many other ways. They are completely separated from us, but we are still able to share in this experience of a solar eclipse where the moon is blocking the sun, blocking the light. And I'll talk about all the cool stuff that I experienced, and I'll talk about a lot of the cool stuff that is experienced during a solar eclipse. So without further ado, let's get right into the show. Very, very excited for today's show. Should be very interesting. I'm only going to talk about one subject. I do not know how long the show is going to be, but I do know that I'm very excited to talk about this stuff, and particularly excited to talk about the importance of this event. So this is from NASA. I'm going to use a lot of NASA sources today. This is a map of where the eclipse was. So you can see right down there in the bottom part right there, you can kind of see where it starts. I was right up here. I will actually go and show you where I was. So I'm in Pittsburgh currently right now. My original plan was to drive up to Erie and go up in here and see it. However, I did not need to because I was up in here, up by Tupper Lake. So this entire area that you're seeing right here in this black section, that is 100% covered, right? And it's a huge plot of land because the moon is, relative to us, very large. So I was right up in this middle area by Saranac Lake, Tupper Lake, in a place specifically right here in Long Lake. That's specifically where I watched this from. And it was amazing. Skies were amazing. When I first came in, I flew in, went to Washington, D.C., which was very cool because I got to see the Washington Monument. I think some kind of Congress house. I'm not sure, maybe U.S. Senate or House of Representatives. I'm not sure. But, or maybe they're in the same building. I'm not an expert. But I went there and I saw that, and that was very cool. I love that airport, the Reagan International Airport, I think it's called. And so then I flew in on Thursday, and when I landed, it was snowing. I landed actually in Albany, New York, which is the capital, south right here. You can see it's like an hour drive from there to maybe an hour 15 or so, but it's a pretty far drive up north. But so that's where I actually saw it from. And the weather was first 2 days, very cold, lots of snow, both days. So that's Thursday and Friday. Saturday, not as much snow, but the sky was pretty much filled with clouds. So I was very nervous Saturday. Then comes Sunday, weather's a little bit better. It's still very cold as well. Then Monday, it is a beautiful, perfect day. There is no clouds in the sky. The weather is actually pretty nice. It got right around 60 degrees outside, maybe mid 60s, right at the time when the eclipse actually started, around my local time, around like 2:30. And I'll show you in pictures because the pictures are time-stamped as well. But this is the path that it took over the entire country. You can see I'm right up here. You can see it's kind of hard to see. You see Syracuse right down there, but 3:25. That's approximately the exact time that I saw the actual full blocking of the sun. It was about 3:25. Very, very cool. And the whole thing, it took, I mean, I saw it at 3:25, around 3:20, 3:30. That's when I saw the total solar eclipse. But the sun initially started to get blocked much earlier in the day. So it started getting blocked around 2:15, 2:20, when part of the sun was actually blocked. But to the outside observer, to me, I did not see any difference with the outside. It didn't get darker or anything for 45 minutes, close to an hour later, when it really started to get noticeably dark. And I have some pictures of that as well. I also have a time lapse video that I took after the fact. Now, unfortunately, I was not thinking. I should have set up my iPad to take a time lapse video basically from right before totality through maybe 10, 15 minutes after the fact. And that would have been a really cool video to have. But I was not thinking about that. I was thinking about looking at the solar eclipse and looking at my surroundings and just awestruck, which I'll get into later. But so this particular one, you can see kind of in Texas, a lot of photos that I saw online that I will share with you were from Dallas, Texas. Dallas, Austin, Texas. A lot of people down in Texas, Houston as well, saw this as well. I would say that would be the majority of photos on online sites, on like Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. Most of them were from Texas, which I thought was interesting. A good amount from Ohio as well, and some from Erie, Pennsylvania. Obviously, here in Pittsburgh, we had people take photos of it that I saw, but they did not have a total one here. So there were some things that they missed out on that I was able to experience that are absolutely insane. So it begins basically in Dallas, Texas at 12:23. Now this started basically in Mexico, right? Not exactly in Mexico because Mexico was south. But that's kind of where you can see that any real effects of the sun blocking, of where you can see the moon from land, would be in Mexico. Now, if you're in the ocean, obviously, you could have seen it as well, because if you look right here, it actually goes way out into the ocean, right? So there it goes through Mexico right there, okay? That's the first piece of land that's going to see it, right? But it goes all the way out into the ocean as well. So if you were in the ocean at the time, you could see it as well, which I think is pretty cool. But it went through Maine and it stopped there 3:34. So you can see how fast this thing is moving, right? So it gets in Texas, totality maximum. So when the sun is blocked, the sun is 100% blocked, 1:42 in Dallas, Texas. Then less than 2 hours later, under 2 hours later, it is all the way up in New York to basically where I saw it. And all still less than 2 hours away, it ends in Maine at 3:33. So I saw it approximately at 3:20. 3:20 is basically when I saw it. But that is kind of the background of this one. I mean, I can go right here, but I recommend that you look through this and kind of see during your time when you were there. And it was kind of hard to see because I was really focused on trying to get the images right and to actually get the time correct to when it was, because I was thinking that we would see it sometime at around like 2:30. 2:30 I thought was when it was going to start the totality, but that's when it started, just barely partially covering it. So I was very, very worried early on when I wasn't seeing anything. But here, you can go right here. And now you can see it is 3:23 right here. Let's go a little bit faster. 3:24. This is basically right when it started. So you can see right here in Long Lake, that's right where I'm at. 3:24, 43, 44, 45, right? So we're right here in the middle. And then we go boom, 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 boom. And then basically right about 3:28 was probably when it ended, but we'll see right here, 3:27. Boom. 3:27:50 is basically when it left. And it continued on its way. But this thing was moving. It was a very short experience, but I, along with many others, got some great photos. This is an actual Reddit thread called r/solar eclipse. So after I did this, I wanted to find some pictures specifically for the podcast, but also specifically for my own enjoyment to see if my pictures actually stack up to these other photos. So we'll look through right here. This is, I believe this looks like it's in Texas. One of the things about the Texas solar eclipse was there was a lot of cloud coverage. So some people had to look through the clouds to see it. I was fortunate enough that I had not a single cloud in the sky, which was my prediction that it would be, I think I might have talked about it here on the podcast as well, but that I was worried that it was basically going to be very bad weather and I was expecting there to be clouds and me not being able to see it. But I was lucky enough to be able to see it completely perfectly. This is another photo that really caught my eye because if we can click on it and zoom in, if you look right, let me go right there. I guess if you take a look on the ground, if you can see my cursor right there, on the ground right there, you see little slivers and you see how it's very shadowy right there. It's much better on this right side and the bottom right here. The little slivers, they almost look like the letter C, is light from the sun that is being reflected into this particular shape. Whereas if the sun was completely uncovered, it would just be one continuous thing of light because there's nothing actually covering the light. Just like if you have a flashlight in front of your face and you take part of your hand and block it off, and then you look at the light that's on the wall, you'll notice that there's a certain shape that's on the wall that replicates the light that is blocked by your hand. Like the same kind of thing works with the sun, but on a much larger scale. So I thought this was a really cool image to kind of showcase. This is almost at totality. Show kind of how you could see on the ground in your surrounding area what the actual environment looked like. And it was very, very cool. This is Waco, Texas. This is a very nice image right here. Is it going to get us right to it? It's kind of right in the corner. What if I just go boom? All right, you can kind of see it right there. Very nice. Look at that. Very nice. There are some very good images in this Reddit thread. Oh, let me not do that. There we go. This is here in Dallas. I'll get to this picture next. But this is Dallas. You can see a lot of Texas ones here. You can see that shine coming off. And if we actually zoom in right here, this person did a very good job of capturing solar flares coming off of the surface of the sun, which again is 93 million miles away. And we're able to see it here from Earth. And those things that you're seeing on the top section, the little, I guess they kind of look a little purple almost. Those are flames that are very, very far. We're talking thousands of miles long, if not maybe tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands miles long, stretching out into space because the sun is a massive nuclear reaction happening in space. And these are a result that are being shot out of the sun that we're able to see here from Earth. And you'll notice that they're kind of pointed in a 360 direction. That's because you don't see the ones that are pointed right at us. And the ones that are pointed right at us, I've talked about this many times, are responsible after interacting with our planet's magnetic sphere, or our magnetic field, sorry, creates the northern lights or the aurora borealis. So you can see right here, these things, if they were pointed right at us, could potentially cause some northern lights. So very cool to see. Also very cool to know that these things could definitely take us out if needed, right? Very, very cool. This is one from Dallas, Texas. You can see right here. Some of these are very similar to the images that I will show you as well, because I was also able to see the solar flares coming off of the sun as well, which I thought were very, very cool. But you can see in this image, there's an actual plane right here, which I think is very cool and actually looks really good in this picture, because you got to imagine the exposure is way, way down. So props to this guy for being able to capture this image. This is here in Mexico. This is a nice American Express ad. Fredericksburg, Texas. Look at that. With the clouds and everything. Beautiful, beautiful. Yes, this is it as well. Then we have some people who proposed and stuff. That was amazing. A nice little meme. Continue onward. I mean, beautiful, beautiful pictures right here. I highly, highly suggest you go check this out. Some people doing amazing, amazing stuff. Indianapolis was also a good place to see it as well. I saw Pat McAfee and those guys looking at it as well. So, what exactly is a solar eclipse, and why is it something that you, as the listener, should care about? Well, I certainly care about it, but now let's talk about why I think it's important. There's been many of these since the beginning of time, which we'll get into later, but I just wanted to kind of touch on why there was some scientific studies during this recent one and why they really care about this. Like, is it just that the sun is blocked by the moon and that's just a result of the orbit of the moon and it's really nothing special? Well, actually, it's not. Today, NASA scientists still study eclipses to make new discoveries about the sun, Earth, and our space environment. Today, total solar eclipses are particularly important because they allow scientists to see a part of the sun's atmosphere known as the corona that's too faint to see except when the bright light of sun is blocked. So this kind of works out in space as well. One of the ways that we are able to actually see exoplanets and discover exoplanets is called the transit method. So what happens is you look at a distant star, say, for example, 500 million light years away. You see that at a certain point, the brightness of the sun goes down at a specific point. And if you look at, it's very hard to see a direct image of the sun, but you can detect when the light from that particular star decreases at a certain point and then goes back and increases back to a regular point a set period of time later. What scientists have discovered is that during that period of time, oftentimes an exoplanet will pass in front of that sun in a particular point, not completely covering the light, but covering a portion of the light to our eyes here on Earth. And by doing so, one, it allows us to look at the star a little bit better because it's not as bright and blinding our telescopes here on Earth or in space. But it also allows us to detect the atmospheric properties or particular mass, density, all those kinds of things of the exoplanet as well. So this is not something that just works for our sun. We use it to discover distant worlds as well. And one of those places that I've talked about is K2-18b, which I got to revisit another time. I have not checked in on that one in a while, but now that I mention it, I'm going to go research that a little bit more as soon as I stop recording today to see kind of if they've made any improvements. So yes, scientists use instruments called coronagraphs to block the sun's light in a manner similar to a total eclipse, but these instruments still struggle to reveal the region of the corona closest to the sun where many important processes occur. So basically right on the surface of the sun. Obviously, very hard to see when you have the sun blinding. your telescopes. It's very hard to see. Why we observe solar eclipses. So, studying the innermost part of the corona, visible only during total solar eclipses, is key to answering fundamental questions about how heat and energy are transferred from the sun out into the solar wind, the constant stream of particles that the sun spews into the solar system. Solar wind can impact humans and technology at Earth. So, understanding how it becomes accelerated at the sun can help predict its impacts at home. Like I mentioned earlier, northern lights, corona borealis, is a result from these solar winds. They reach out into space, they come in contact with Earth's magnetic field, and it kind of reaches around the Earth and it hits at the poles to create what we view as the corona borealis or the northern lights. Total solar eclipses provide an opportunity to study Earth's atmosphere under uncommon conditions. In contrast to the global change in light that occurs every day at dusk and dawn, a solar eclipse changes illumination of Earth and its atmosphere under a comparatively small region of the moon's shadow. This localized blocking of solar energy is useful for studying the sun's effects on our atmosphere, especially the upper atmosphere, where the sun's energy creates a layer of charged particles called the ionosphere. Understanding this region is important because it's home to many low Earth orbit satellites, as well as communication signals such as radio waves and the signals that make GPS work as well. So recent solar eclipses, the 2017 solar eclipse, I personally saw that one. That was a very cool one to see because I think it was nice. And it was not as nice as the 2024 one, but it was still a relatively cool experience. I look back on it now and I appreciate it a lot more for what it was. But at the time, I was just kind of like, cool, that's all right. Now let's kind of get into the history of solar eclipses. When did they originally start? How far back can we go to see when humans recorded the first solar eclipse? Have they been happening forever, and or is this just a phenomenon that just started maybe a couple hundred years ago? Well, this website from NASA details many historical points for viewing of the solar eclipse, and that we will go through many of these as we see. We have many different total ones and partially blocked ones as well. But this first one, 2137 BCE, it was an annular eclipse. So not a total solar eclipse. It does not mean that the entire sun was taken out. But this is also, you see this note next to it. It was Ho and Hai, the drunk astronomers. And then we have, quote, here lies the bodies of Ho and Hai, whose fate, though sad, was visible, being hanged because they could not spy. The eclipse which was invisible, author unknown, story may be apocryphal. So not too much really behind this story that scientists can really point to and say that this is 100% the first reference of it or the first documentation of it. They do have other ones that will be here that you can see that provide definitely a better view of this as well, like the Ugarit eclipse, which I will talk about soon. Here we go. So this is in 1375 BCE. You can see on the day of the new moon in the month of Hayar, the sun was put to shame and went down in the daytime with Mars in attendance. This is early Mesopotamian records. Then you can see relatively under 100 years later, in 1302 BCE, there was a Chinese eclipse that was viewed and recorded as well. And I will have reference to each and all of these. But let's take a look at the first one. Here we go. This is particularly for that Ugarit one. The one that if we take a look back, you can see occurred approximately 1375 BCE. So let's look at this study right here. This is from Harvard. Not going to go through the whole text, but I will link this down in the description so that you can read the whole thing for yourself. So, an astronomical event recorded on a clay tablet found in 1948 among the ruins of the ancient city of Ugarit in what is now Syria was identified 20 years ago as a description of a total solar eclipse that occurred on May 3rd, 1375 BC. The dating of ancient solar eclipses provide reference points to fix the long-term evolution of angular momentum in the Earth-Moon system. We have reanalyzed the Ugarit eclipse record, a new historic dating of the tablet, and mentioned in the text of the display of the planet Mars during the eclipse, as well as the month in which it occurred, enables us to show that the recorded eclipse in fact occurred on March 5th, 1223 BC. This new date implies that the secular deceleration of the Earth's rotation has changed very little during the past 3,000 years. So this one is, according to this particular study, was 1223. And then we'll continue on going down this list. You can kind of see many of these. Once again, I will put this down in the description. So if you want to go through these, you can also see maps to each of these as well, especially the later ones where you can see specifically where on Earth they were taken from. But I mean, very, very cool. But now let's kind of get into a more specific history of eclipses and more so the viewing of the stars that has happened through recent history. The oldest recorded eclipse in human history may have been on November 30th, 3340 BCE. A series of spiral-shaped and circular petroglyphs was found at the Loughcrew megalithic monument in County Meath, Ireland. Petroglyphs are rock carvings made by pecking into stone. Immediately in front of a carving that shows overlapping concentric circles, archaeologists found the charred remains of nearly 50 individuals. Scholars continue to research and discuss the meaning of the petroglyph. So what is this? A megalithic monument in Ireland? Let's take a look. You can see right here in this first image right here, you see those drawings there, you see the circles, and let's get into what they could potentially mean. Loughcrew is the home of a superb collection of megalithic art. Many of the structural stones of the chambers bear engravings, and doubtless there were many more in the past. Eugene Conwell, who discovered Loughcrew while on a picnic with his wife, had a few of the stones illustrated for his lectures at the Royal Irish Academy. The Hag's Chair left is one of his illustrations. The Dutch artist de Noor recorded many of the Loughcrew engravings in the 1860s, a very valuable record since many of these stones have greatly weathered since then. Two of his illustrations are reproduced below. One of de Noor's illustrations can be seen in Michael Harity's 1975 book, Irish Passage Graves. This is a picture of what he saw. And here's an excerpt from Pagan Island by Wood Martin. What the peculiar marking called rock scribing represents is a question still unanswered, though numerous conjectures have been hazarded. Cup, markings, incomplete rings, a series of circles around the central cups, sometimes with a radial groove through the circles. These are the commonest types. It has often been advanced that these incisions in the hard rock could have only been produced with metallic implements. But it is stated that a person experimenting with only the assistance of a flint chisel and a wooden mallet cut in the space of 2 hours nearly an entire circle on a block of granite which bore archaic devices. The megalithic chambers and the cairns on the hills over Loughcrew County Meath are more lavishly adorned with types of primeval sculpturing and devices than those at present known in any district except France. For Ireland possesses a collection of this species of prehistoric ornamentation, which, in singularity, number, and quaintness of design, is approached in point of interest only by some of the great stone chambers of the district of the Morbihan. of the Morbihan. In Ireland, cup markings appear to be the commonest form of ornamentation, and they present two leading varieties: circular hollows of more or less depth and of a diameter varying from 18 inches to as little as 1 inch. These depressions sometimes occur singly, but usually they are in groups, not unfrequently around or partly enclosing each. May be observed one or more incised lines, often of considerable depth, to which other markings and variations are occasionally added. You can see that's the chamber right there. And if we zoom in, I mean, you can see it everywhere, but this is that particular image that was in that drawing that he made right here. And then if you take a look over here to the left, you see even more indentations right there. And this thing is a couple thousand years old. Somewhat similar rock scribings found in Yorkshire and Northumberland, on the Cheviot Hills near Edinburgh, or in the Orkneys. Various attempts have been made to decipher their meaning. The Right Reverend Charles Graves, Bishop of Limerick, propounded the theory that these circling rock carvings were rude maps of wrath or observed. So it's not exactly for sure that the real meaning of these is actually to describe a solar eclipse, because it's kind of hard. There's obviously no words to describe what it is. It's just images of circular shapes, but let's continue reading on. It was to be presumed that the persons who carved the inscriptions intended to represent circular objects of some kind. But what could these objects have been? Some have suggested shields. This notion seems inconsistent with the fact that the same stone presents so many circular symbols of different sizes, varying to the small shallow cup of 1 inch or 2 in diameter to the group of concentric circles 2 feet across. It also seems probable that, as shields in general used to be bear distinctive devices, so these would reappear in the inscriptions, but the inscribed circles exhibit no such variety as might have been expected on the hypothesis. Again, if the circles represent shields, what could be meant by the openings in the circumference of many of them? Lastly, what connection could there be between the ideas of shields and the long lines appearing in the Stag monument, or the short lines of that in Ballisnavir? Those are different things. Nevertheless, it seems open to obvious objections. In astronomical diagrams, one could hardly fail to recognize a single symbol conspicuous among the rest as denoting the sun or moon, or two such symbols denoting both these bodies. One might also expect to see some delineation, even by the rudest hand, of the phases of the moon. Yes. Now, they don't obviously have glasses like we would see, so they wouldn't potentially even be able to see the moon crossing in front of the sun until the very moments before and after total solar eclipse. It has been suggested that these circles were intended to serve as molds in which metal rings might be cast. This explanation is decisively negated by the fact that the circles appear on parts of the rock which are not horizontal. Another proposed idea is that circles were used for the purpose of playing some game. So it's not 100% certain that these are for specific phases of the moon, specific time and event of a solar eclipse, but it might. You can see more images of it right here. I mean, they got a bunch of crazy stuff right here. It's not as if it's just basically a image of a solar eclipse, correct? You can see right here, this is an actual picture of it. Lots of spirals, lots of engravings right there, but what does it all mean? Let's continue looking on. Another one right here. These considerations led me to attribute these carvings and sculpture to the laborious idleness of a pastoral people, passing the long and weary day in tending their flocks and herds. They amuse themselves by carving and cutting those various figures and the rude outlines of primitive men in various countries. Like the rude attempts at drawing by children, cannot but bear a family resemblance to one another, their utter absence of art being frequently their chief point. of relationships. So there's multiple things right here, correct? American researchers Martin Brennan demonstrated in the early 1980s that the equinox sunrises illuminate this complex slab of megalithic symbols. This is Brennan's great contribution to Irish megalithic research, how the engravings interact with the beams of light and by extension, the heavenly body. Brennan's groundbreaking book, The Stars and the Stones, has line drawings of many of the engravings at Loughcrew. The book has recently been republished as The Stones of Time. The Hag's Chair. The only surviving engraved curbstone at Loughcrew, the Hag's Chair, is positioned on the north side of Cairn T. The engravings are very much weathered today and not obvious at all on the stone except for some relatively recent graffiti. The picture above shows the curb art highlights using Conwell's engraving of the Hag's Chair. Cairn U also has several engravings within its chamber, including a long set of inverted nested arcs on the backstone, which may represent a sunrise. The stones in the recesses on either side also bear interesting compositions. There are scattered engravings on the other monuments, which can be found by a careful search in good light. On Cairn Bain West, the largest number of surviving stones are with Cairn L. Its unique standing stone and basin, with its unique standing stone and basin. A beautiful and dramatic design of nested circles, cut marks, and arcs cover the slab at the rear end of the right-hand recess. So we see more right here on a different slab right here. But it's, like I said, it's not 100% showing a thing that you could say, oh, that's definitely a solar eclipse. So this one is not super strong, but the fact that they were talking about position of stars in the sky, and potentially you could match this up with when a solar eclipse happened at that particular time. But it's not 100% for sure. All right. A cairn is a man-made structure of stones built by the first large-scale agriculturists from the Neolithic period. Building a passage tomb are centered around 3200 BC to 2900 BC. Loughcrew is estimated to be 5,200 years old, which is crazy. Get a nice look of it right here. That's where it is. I mean, it's a beautiful place. That's what it looks like from above. There's some stones right there as well. Very, very cool. 32 recorded cairns spread over the four rolling hills of Caribane West, Carrickbrack, Caribane East, and Patrickstown. The highest point is Cairn T, which is 276 meters above sea level. So these are the different points. So it's not like it's one site where you're having these drawings. There's multiple different places that if you go inside of them, they have these images and these drawings. So very, very cool. Now back to this. So maybe, right? Let's continue on. Around 1200 BCE, scribes in Anyang, China, recorded eclipses on oxen's shoulder blades and tortoise shells called oracle bones. In these eclipse records, the scribe said the sun has been eaten. More than 3,000 years after these records were created in the 1980s and 1990s, a team of astronomers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory studied these eclipse records to research changes in Earth's rotation. Determining exactly when the eclipse was seen and where the moon's shadow fell on Earth helped them calculate the rate of Earth's spin. The eclipse they used for this research were in 1226 BCE, 1198 BCE, 1172 BCE, 1163 BCE, and 1161 BCE. If Earth were rotating at the same speed it is now, these eclipses would have occurred thousands of miles from Anyang. Since we know they occurred in Anyang, the scientists concluded that Earth's rotation had slowed by 47 thousandths of a second per day in the past 3,200 years. Part of the reason for the change in the rotation of the Earth is impacts or things on Earth that are shaking and causing the Earth to slow, which would include tsunamis and earthquakes, which we know we've had major tsunamis and earthquakes within the past 3,200 years. I mean, even in the past 300 years, we've had major earthquakes. So let's take a look at this study right here. Examination of early Chinese records of solar systems. I'm going to read as much as I can of this. I am going to put this in the description like always. This is a very, I got through maybe 4 or 5 pages of this. It's very interesting stuff, and I think it's very important stuff as well. But let's just read the abstract. The earliest Chinese historical text that contains a systematic records of solar eclipses is the spring and autumn annals. In historical periods before the spring and autumn period, solar eclipse records are vague and sporadic. Although numerous scholars have investigated these records in the past 2,000 years, it has been rather difficult for them to reach final conclusions. With recent advancements both in astronomical computation and in historic chronology, there has been significant progress in the study of the alleged early Chinese records of solar eclipses. These records include the references to the solar eclipse of the three Mao, and of Zhongkang in the legends of the Qi dynasty. The expressions such as the, quote, 3 flames ate the sun, and the moon were eclipsed, and the sun was Ji in the oracle bone inscriptions of the Shang dynasty, which we talked about earlier. And the passage of the sky became extremely dark. The day dawned twice, the sun was eclipsed in the literature of the Zhou dynasty. Let's read a little bit of this introduction. Among various early Chinese astronomical records, that of the solar eclipse was the most complete one and occupied a special position. This was not only because an eclipse, especially a total one, was so spectacular that people were frightened, but also because it was a warning to the emperor, for the sun was the symbol of the emperor according to traditional astrological theories. When an eclipse occurred, the emperor would normally eat vegetarian meals, avoid the main palace, perform rituals to rescue the sun, and sometimes issue imperial edict to take the blame on himself. Moreover, in order to compile and issue reliable calendars, which was one of the most important governmental affairs during the imperial times, eclipses had to be observed regularly because they could verify the accuracy of the calendars. Therefore, systematic observing and recording of eclipses, although part of the feudalist superstitious rites, was required for scientific research into the calendar during imperial times in China. Good thing they did that. The extant systematic early Chinese records of eclipses are from the spring and autumn period 770 to 476 BC. In the spring and autumn annals, the history of the state Lu, 37 eclipses are recorded. The loss of eclipse record from the Warring States period, which was 475 to 221 BC, and the Qin dynasty, 221 to 206 BC, is severe. From the Western Han dynasty of 206 BC to AD 23 to the end of the Ming dynasty, AD 1368 to 1644. However, such records are complete. Their format, which is rather simple and regular, is as follows. On a certain sexagesimal date of a certain month of a certain year, the sun was eclipsed. Generally, there is not much information in these records. By the Qin dynasty, the eclipse records are not only complete, but also include details of the magnitudes and the times of the eclipses. However, studies have shown that these data were predictions rather than actual records of observations. I would imagine it would be very hard to do that in 1644. The eclipse records before the spring and autumn records, so-called early Chinese eclipse records, are vague and sporadic. So this would be in relation to that very early one that occurred in approximately 1200 BC, 1300 BC. In the study of these records, there were problems such as how to understand and interpret the original text and how to determine whether they are eclipse records, and if so, what kind of eclipse were recorded. Furthermore, the questions of how to narrow down the chronological period for a particular eclipse record and what method of astronomical computing to adopt are two common problems in this field. The problem of determining the chronological period for an early Chinese eclipse record is caused by the lack of clear temporal information in these records. In an early eclipse record, if there was a specific date that could be converted to a precise corresponding Gregorian calendar date, it would be a very simple matter to identify the eclipse listed in the record. Unfortunately, the fact is that these early records normally do not contain specific dates. In a record, there may only be a king's name or a month number and a date without the king's name. Even if a king names appears in such a record, it is still rather difficult to narrow down the chronological period for the record, because the generally accepted earliest precisely determined date in Chinese history is 841 BC. That is, we can actually go back here. I don't know if that will be here. Yeah, that could potentially be this one right here. And you can see one of these. Now, this is very, very cool. I like all the notes that they have for each of these ones right there. So please, please, please go look at that because it's very, very interesting. Now, this study does not actually address this very, very early piece, but it goes through many of them, and it's actually not too long of a read. I know it says page 62 right in that corner right up there, but this is actually not 62 pages. It's maybe like 10 to 15. So if you have some time, read through each of these as it kind of goes through the evidence of other ones that were recorded and how accurate it was based on the emperor that it was and how they could determine the date. But if we do go back right here, this would be the map of the sky of when at this particular point in time, so right around 1300 BC, as we talked about, June 5th, you can see where the eclipse kind of goes through. So we're actually able to, based on kind of the rotation of the Earth, where we were in orbit, where the moon was, where all the different celestial bodies were in the sky, we're able to see kind of how it would have traveled, which is very, very cool. So you can see right here, this right bottom kind of left side of the page right here, that is Asia. And as you can see right there, those little blue lines, that's where the moon is going to pass and provide totality. So a total block on this specific stretch. So I believe that is, I don't think that's Africa, but it could potentially be. But it goes all the way up and above China as well. And potentially right there, that is where they would have been able to see it. But you can kind of see, so the path width was 272 kilometers, and it lasted for about 6.5 minutes. So very, very cool. You can kind of see a bunch of other different stats about how fast they think it was going and all that kind of stuff. Also eclipse magnitude as well. So very, very cool. So this is actually how it traveled on this particular date. So we are actually able to see that if records are correct, it would have happened at this point in time. Very, very cool. Let's continue on. Eclipses also appear in religious texts. Christian texts mention that the moon turned to blood after Jesus' crucifixion, potentially referring to a lunar eclipse, during which the moon takes on a reddish hue. Using this textual source, scholars narrowed down a possible date of crucifixion to Friday, April 3rd, 33 CE, because a lunar eclipse occurred that day. In the Quran, a solar eclipse is mentioned before the birth of Muhammad, as well as on the day his son Ibrahim passed. Very, very cool right here. And let's take a look at this right here. So this is from the National Radio Astronomy Observatory. Question. This is 2016. I'm working on a thesis for the chronology of the last month of Jesus's life. According to NASA, as best I can make out, there was a partial lunar eclipse about sunset 6 to 7 p.m. in Israel the day Jesus died. Also, they record a total solar eclipse 2 weeks earlier, about 1 p.m., March 19th, AD 33. My problem is, if my understanding of NASA's astronomical charts is correct, there's a span of 15 and 1/4 days between the two events. But if I have a lunar month, it is 14 and 3/4 days. How is it that there is a half a day difference? I'm an unemployed carpenter, not an informed astronomer. On my own, I can't work out the math or fully comprehend the NASA charts. Can you please confirm the exact time of the conjunction March 19th, AD 33, in what would be Jerusalem time, and how the intervening span is what it is, if it is not 14 and 3/4 days? Here's the answer. The NASA lunar eclipse information indicates that a partial lunar eclipse occurred on April 3rd, 33 CE, with peak totality happening at about 1647, 15:1 local time in Jerusalem. So about 4:30 or 4:47. NASA's solar eclipse table also indicated that there was a total solar eclipse on March 19th, 33 CE, with peak totality at 12:50, 14 local time in Jerusalem. So basically right around 1 o'clock, though it was not visible from Jerusalem. The difference between these solar and lunar eclipses is about 15 days and 4 hours. I believe that the reason why this time difference is not exactly one half of the one synodic month is due to the subtle differences between the lunar and solar orbits, which dictate the periodicity of eclipses. This periodicity, called the Saros cycle, has been known since ancient times and occurs due to the natural resonances during the synodic month, time between orbital perigees and time between orbital node crossings. The NASA Eclipses and Saros page contained all of these details regarding this recurrence for eclipses. Once again, put a bunch of these down in the description. All of these little blue hyperlinks I'll put in the description as well so that you can see it. But very, very cool stuff. Let's continue reading. So with that being said, it does appear that there is at least some evidence that on that particular day, when it is believed that Jesus was crucified, a at least partial eclipse occurred, and then a total eclipse had occurred previously to that as well, which is very cool. And then same thing with the birth of Muhammad. It is mentioned, and then as well when his son Ibrahim passed as well. Also, we know about the Mayans and the records that they kept about the stars. So it was no surprise to me when I read that the Maya kept meticulous records of astronomical events, documented in hieroglyphs carved into stone, painted on pottery and murals, and written on accordion folded bark books called codices. The Maya astronomical record includes documentation of eclipses. In their book, Astronomy in the Maya Codices, Harvey and Victoria Bricker demonstrated that the Maya predicted the solar eclipses of July 1991. Crazy, crazy. They also predicted 2012 and the end of the world. So their hit rate is certainly not 100%, let's say. Knowledge of astronomy as applied to traditional agriculture, the curation of Maya calendars, and ceremonial practices continues through the oral tradition in many Maya communities in Mesoamerica today. This is Chaco Canyon. Look at this. Very cool right there, little drawing. At Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, a petroglyph carved into the rock face by early Pueblo people may represent an eclipse that occurred there on July 11th, 1097. The petroglyph has a swirling loop jetting off to the side, perhaps representing a coronal mass ejection from the sun. NASA studies coronal mass ejections now using spacecraft that mimic the view seen from Earth during eclipses. There are many petroglyphs at Chaco Canyon, which provide important clues about how ancestral Pueblans studied the sun. The many indigenous groups in North America have a variety of interpretation of eclipses developed through history. This video from the Indigenous Education Institute shares more about these experiments. Now, this is a pretty long video, but you could watch a brief section of it to kind of get an idea. Is there a way to playback speed? Oh, do want to.
Olje is the moon. Johana A is the sun. Son is the stars. Shemana Hassan is Mother Earth.
Johana A does. It's dying. Johana A, the sun is dying. That's what we say.
My name is John Spinelli, a Navajo Nation. I learned traditional way when I was young. My father, my grandfather, my uncle, my mother, they are a medicine person. So I raised up with what they carry on this world. So I still carry on today. I share with other people.
Yat-e she'e Janita Benali Yanisha. My name is Janita Benali, and Jones Benali is my father, and I have apprenticed and studied our traditional medicine my entire life from him. I've learned a lot about our medicines and our ceremonial and spiritual ways as Diné people. We've had thousands and thousands and thousands of years to study what's happening in the sky and to develop an understanding through our culture in order to teach and carry on these traditional ways. When the sun and the moon have an eclipse, then you have reverence. You have reverence for that very important time. And it's not our time as human people, it's the time of our universe. We do not look at the eclipse. We do not eat during that time. We do not drink during that time. We don't ingest anything because the quality of the air at that time has changed. And it's that quality of the air and that pull that has changed, and that's what affects our body. And so during that time, there is a particular protocol.
I am the teacher assistant for Achinibagan grades pre-K to kindergarten, and I also teach the language and culture for upper grades. As teachers, we just want our students to be safe, understand what happens, during the eclipse, to be respectful.
Depending on how traditional it is for them or their parents, I think they should practice that. I know a lot of parents don't see these things. They're young parents now, so they don't really participate in anything that's happening. But it's good for the kids to know, and it's good for the parents to know also. I only experienced one when I was younger, when my sisters and I were younger.
And the one I experienced is the one in the evening.
One of the things that we're not allowed to do is to drink or eat or even run around outside.
We would just be quiet, just sit, and my dad would sing.
So they would start singing. They will chant until the sun becomes full again.
The sun would come up kind of reddish, and then it would disappear.
My mother was in the house cooking when all of this started to happen, and she was not quick enough. She was supposed to feed us before.
We normally have supper.
Very, very cool. Once again, I'll link this so that if you want to watch that whole thing, you can, but I don't want to watch that whole thing currently right now. But let's continue on with our reading. Eclipses have contributed to major advances in the history of science. Albert Einstein, might know who he is, first proposed his theory of general relativity in 1916. However, it wasn't until 1919 that results from an eclipse science expedition led by Sir Arthur Eddington validated the theory, and Einstein rose to fame. Einstein hypothesized that gravity is a warping of time and space, distorting the fabric of the universe. A large object like the sun can distort space-time enough that its gravity can bend light. So during the eclipse on May 29th, 1919, scientists saw that some stars appeared in the wrong place, showing evidence of Einstein's theory, which this is called gravitational lensing, which actually happens if you look at certain galaxies or star systems just past where the sun is, or if you look at, say, a galaxy and then a further galaxy behind it, sometimes what happens is as that light is going through space to our eyes here on Earth, the galaxy that's in front of it in reference to us and that more further galaxy, the light actually gets bent a little bit and it changes its direction slightly because of the gravity of, say, a star, of a planet, of a galaxy. So these are things that we still see today, and we can very easily see in distant galaxies. Very, very cool. In August 2017, an eclipse crossed the United States from Oregon to South Carolina. The path of totality crossed 14 states. Pennsylvania, particularly in State College, was not one of them. This was the first total solar eclipse visible in the contiguous U.S. in 38 years, and approximately 2/3 of the U.S. population lived within a day's drive of totality. And then this is really cool right here. You can see this is from that date in August 21st of 2017 of that solar eclipse. You can kind of see if I zoom in right here. I can't slow or speed this up, but you can see right there in that center part. You can see where Mexico is. You can see where Southern California is. You can see those middle parts. You can see Florida. And you see a black dot going across the sky, and particularly right in that northwest part, so around Oregon and around the Canadian border as well, you can see that there's no clouds right there. But where I was in Pennsylvania, it's, once again, I can't stop the GIF or the GIF, however you pronounce it. But where I was, the sky was relatively clear. So you could see potentially at this exact same time, I was somewhere right down there, right under those clouds in the middle of Pennsylvania. So very, very cool that they actually have satellite imagery of this event taking place. This countrywide celestial event was supported by many government agencies. It is estimated that around 215 million Americans viewed that eclipse. 61 million saw it electronically, and 154 million stepped outside to see it with their own eyes. Very, very cool. So we talked about megalithic structures, the very, very earliest possible times of when eclipses could have potentially been viewed. And there's not one answer, but there are specific times earlier before the turn of the century, particularly in the BC times, when there is written evidence, and it can be backed up if we look previously, like we saw with the one that happened in China. We were able to see where the solar eclipse would have actually, or did actually, travel on that particular date, which is very, very cool. But now I want to talk about my own experience in 2017, and then kind of go further onward and talk about my current experience in 2024. So 2017, just started getting into Penn State and kind of exploring my classes, going around campus and exploring the dining hall for the first time and getting pizza all the time. I put on a lot of weight my freshman year because I was able to have a meal plan, and I spent a lot of that money, especially early on, in multiple dining halls around campus, just because I was alone and I didn't really have too many close friends. I had a roommate who I still have a lot of love for. He's a very good dude. But at the time we weren't too close. It was it was less than 3 months into college. So I was still a very, very new person. And when this happened, I jumped at the chance to try and see this because, one, it was an assignment for my class, but also two, because I knew kind of what an eclipse was, but I had never seen one in person. So if you look right here, State College is right there. And now you can see this line right up here says 80%. We were within that point right there. So between 80 and 70%. So when we maybe saw about 75% of the sun totally blocked, I remember it getting slightly darker. It wasn't anything relatively close to the one that I saw this year, but it was still a little bit darker. There was no temperature change. It didn't get any colder. The wind didn't change at all. There was certain things that didn't have any real effect. But you can see the 90% is more south. Like in Pittsburgh, you could have potentially seen over 80% of the sun blocked. But it was very cool that I was able to see this. And this is previously before it. And then this is actually from the the actual day that it happened. And I looked through this before, did not see any photos of myself, but maybe if I go through here a second time, I could potentially be able to see it. But I distinctly remember this because where I saw it was at the Arboretum at Penn State, which is a beautiful outdoor place where they have wide-ranging places of plants and kind of exhibits outside. It's a very beautiful spot on Penn State's campus, but I was right here. In the State College area, thousands turned out for community gatherings or just stepped outside their homes and offices to get a look at the solar eclipse. Pennsylvania wasn't in the path of totality from Oregon to South Carolina that saw a total solar eclipse, the first in the contiguous United States since 1979. Still, central Pennsylvania saw a partial eclipse, which began at 1:15 p.m. and reached its maximum of about 80%, a little bit less, at 2:39 p.m. and would end at 4 p.m. And that is what it looked like above State College if you missed it in person. Very, very beautiful, very nice image. I remember looking through glasses and seeing this, and it was a pretty cool thing to see. Without the glasses, the sun looked the exact same. The sun wasn't any real darker. If you looked at your surrounding area, it was slightly darker, but like I mentioned previously, no temperature change, no issue with the winds or anything weird. But let's continue on. The Arboretum at Penn State was one of 3 locations where Penn State's Department of Astronomy, which I was in class with, and astrophysics hosted gatherings where students and faculty handed out safety glasses to view the eclipse. I remember that they handed them out there. The department got as many as glasses as it could. In recent weeks, they've been hard to come by, and prices through online outlets have soared. We thought it would be large, so it's not surprising, said Kevin Luhman, professor of astronomy and astrophysics. It's a very rare event. For any given location on Earth, a total eclipse happens only once about every 400 years. Crazy. The next total solar eclipse in the US will be in 2024. Now, this is in 2017 when this article is written. It is referencing 7 years in the future, which is very cool. With a path of totality stretching from Texas through Maine and including a small portion of northwestern Pennsylvania, Erie, Pennsylvania to be exact. The last time the area that now includes State College experienced a total solar eclipse was in 1451. And it won't happen again specifically in State College for another 100 years. Now, this wasn't my actual professor. My professor was a female. I do not remember her name. But then they had other people right here. Like, you can't see me in any of these pictures, but I promise you, I was there at the Arboretum that day. And I remember looking up, there was an actual sundial there. And on the sundial, you could see maybe 5 to 10% darkness on it from when you looked at it before and after the partial eclipse. So that was one of the cool things that I was able to see. While clouds moved in during the early afternoon and a threat of rain appeared, the sun was frequently visible and those with safe viewing equipment could see the eclipse. Connor Lum, a Penn State senior, was one of them. He staked out a somewhat secluded spot in the botanical gardens where he had a pair of sunglasses his father, an astronomy buff, got for him months ago. Very cool. And I assume that's him right there. This is the Davy Lab Observatory. This is actually where my astronomy class was in. So right in that building, I took my very first astronomy class, which is very, very cool. That was at the time the president of the university outside looking at it. That's right, Old Main. That's like the main spot on Penn State's campus. So very, very cool. Now let's kind of get into this current 2024 version of the solar eclipse. How is it different than that 2017 one? Well, obviously in State College, I was not able to see a total one, whereas this current one, I was able to, and momentarily I will show you pictures that I captured of it myself. So it's a lot wider. They do this image right here. You see how thin that 2017 line of totality is versus 2024. The line of totality is a lot wider. The path of totality, where viewers can see the moon totally block the sun, revealing the star's outer atmosphere called the corona, is much wider during the upcoming total solar eclipse than it was during the 2017 one. As the moon orbits Earth, its distance from our planet varies. During the 2017 total solar eclipse, the moon was a little bit further away from Earth than it will be during the upcoming total solar eclipse, causing the path of that eclipse to be a little skinnier. In 2017, the path ranged from about 62 to 71 miles wide. During the April eclipse, the path over North America will range about 108 and 122 miles wide, meaning that at any given moment, this eclipse covers more ground. The 2024 eclipse path will also pass over more cities and densely populated areas than the 2017 path did. This will make it easier for more people to see totality. An estimated 31.6 million people live in the path of totality this year, compared to 12 million in 2017. An additional 150 million people live within 200 miles of the path of totality. You don't need to live within the path of totality to see the eclipse, though. In April, 99% of people who reside in the United States will be able to see the partial or total eclipse from where they live. Every contiguous U.S. state plus parts of Alaska and Hawaii will experience at least a partial solar eclipse, solar eclipse, sorry. Very, very cool. Also, longer time in totality. This also has to do with the distance from Earth that the moon is. In April, totality will last longer than it did in 2017. 7 years ago, the longest period of totality was experienced near Carbondale, Illinois at 2 minutes, 42 seconds. Very, very quick. It happened very quick. I remember very briefly in 2017, very briefly seeing the partial eclipse. And then, like I said, the surrounding area didn't really change all that much in terms of brightness and all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very quick and over very soon. For the upcoming eclipse, totality will last up to 4 minutes and 28 seconds, right above Mexico. As the eclipse enters Texas, totality will last about 4 minutes, 26 seconds. And then as the eclipse exits the US and enters Canada, the eclipse will last up to 3 minutes, 21 seconds, sorry. During any total solar eclipse, totality lasts longer than the longest near the center of the path, widthwise, and decreases towards the end. But those seeking totality shouldn't worry that they need to be exactly at the center. The time in totality falls off pretty slowly until you get close to the edge. Also, at this time, there is more solar activity. Very, very cool. Every 11 years or so, the sun's magnetic field flips, causing a cycle of increasing then decreasing solar activity. During solar minimum, there are fewer giant eruptions from the sun, such as solar flares and coronal mass ejections. But during solar maximum, the sun becomes more active. In 2017, the sun was nearing solar minimum. Viewers of the total eclipse could see the breathtaking corona, but since the sun was quiet, streamers flowing into the solar atmosphere restricted to just about the equatorial regions of the star. The sun is more magnetically symmetrical during solar minimum, causing this simpler appearance. During the 2024 eclipse, the sun will be in or near solar maximum when the magnetic field is more like a tangled hairball. Streamers will likely be visible throughout the corona, and that they were, which I have pictures of that I saw with my own eyes. Like, you didn't even need to have glasses in order to see them. With your glasses off during totality, you could see it. You could see it with your own eyes. And this thing is 93 million miles away. And if one of those things is long enough and powerful enough and pointed in just the right direction, it could take us out. Done. There's not a thing we could do. Not a thing we could do. There's no blocking it. There's nothing you could do. One of those comes out at any second. Any second. It's strong enough, it's powerful enough, it's long enough, and it hits us hard enough. We're done. Bye-bye. We're roasted. Too much radiation, boom, you're gone. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. Also, during this one, there was more scientific research done. A lot of people were talking about specific missions that they flew into space to actually view this thing, which is very, very cool. All right, now into the moment we were all waiting for, my images of the actual thing. So let's take a look. These are my images that I personally took the day of April 2024. This is the first image of the day. I was kind of just testing out. You can see exactly where I was on that day, right in Long Lake, New York, right on this lake right here. Very, very cool. But you can kind of see it's hard to see. This is just straight up regular iPhone camera taking a picture of it through. This is actually taking through a window. And you can see this is at 1:55, April 8th. So this is before the sun is blocked whatsoever. I was thinking, okay, I got about another half an hour before the total eclipse, but I was wrong. Partiality started about 30 minutes later, which I thought was very, very cool. So let's go forward and I'll show you the timing of each of these. There we go. Let's go to the next one. This next one's at 2:03. So still nothing. I was more so or less just trying to find good images of the sun to take where it wouldn't be super bright or super dark. And as you can see, once I start getting actual blockage of the sun, the quality goes down a lot more because it was very hard to do so. But I actually downloaded an app called it was just like solar eclipse camera, and it made it a lot better. But you can see early right here, this is at 2:19. So you can see barely any part of the sun is being covered. And at this point, I started getting really anxious. I started getting really nervous because like in 2017, I didn't know all of the science behind it. And even back in April, I didn't know a lot of the history behind it and all the times that this has happened previously in the past and just how special this is. And so right here, I was getting a little nervous. I was like, oh crap, I got to make sure these pictures are good. You can see it looks really, really yellow. This next one's at 2:19. A little bit more is being covered. And we can kind of go forward right here. Now I'm starting to zoom in. 2:23 right here. You can see a good piece of the sun is actually being covered. You can't see any of the corona yet. You can't see really anything. And outside at this very moment, still bright out. It is actually warm enough. It's in, like I said, the mid 60s right now. So we have our sweatshirts off. You could, if you wanted to, you could be wearing a t-shirt and shorts. You would be a little uncomfortable, but it wouldn't be unbearable. So it's actually the weather right there is actually very nice. You can see kind of right here. This is where I started to really try and zoom in and get a good picture of it. And this is right at 2:33. So 2:33, we're maybe a quarter of it through. And I'm starting to get a little worried as I'm taking these pictures because like, this isn't going to look too good. And then I think right here is where I made the switch. I downloaded another app. You can see the previous photo at 2:33. And then this is at 2:49. So a little while later, I had downloaded that app and I'd started messing around with it and taking pictures. So we're almost at 50% of the sun is covered where I finally get this app. And these images are actually starting to look really, really good. You can see the clear edge of the sun. You can see the clear edge of the moon right there. And I was like, okay, we're pretty good right now. We're pretty good. Then you see right here, trying to get the settings down of it just a bit. This is almost at 3 o'clock. So we're at right about 50% right here. And we continue onward, just more so playing around with the camera. This is 2:51, almost 2:52. Keep going forwards, 2:52:06, so about 10 seconds later. Just taking constant images over time. This is another image at 2:58. You can see now we're approaching maybe past 50% coverage. So now it's starting to look like we're in the home stretch. It's about to be 3 o'clock. But the area around me, no noticeable difference in brightness, in colors, in sounds, in anything. There's no indication that the sun is being blocked. You take your glasses off for a second, the sun is just as bright and is about 50% covered, which I thought was interesting because I would have expected a 50% reduction in temperature, 50% reduction in light as well, but that was not the case. Continuing onward, now we're at almost 3 o'clock. I don't know if I took one exactly at 3 o'clock. That's basically right at 3 o'clock. That's maybe over 50% right there. So we're getting into the home stretch. You can see right here, we're getting almost 4 minutes later. We're getting a lot closer. And I was doing my best this entire time to try and take a photo so that I could talk about it here on the podcast, but also at the same time, try and take seconds to look at it with my own eyes and try and embed this moment into my brain. And as we kind of continue on, you can kind of see it looks like it's getting a little bit darker, but I promise you, there wasn't really too much of a difference, right? Like in the outside area, you can kind of see in this next photo I take, still kind of bright outside, right? This is right at 3:05. Right outside on a deck, nothing crazy about the outside. It was getting maybe slightly darker than what it was previously. If you look at this kind of line right here from the house, maybe that was about 2 feet over, from my perspective, over to the left. So there really hasn't been one. There was no temperature change, which I did not think was going to be too much of a factor. I didn't think I would feel any temperature change. But there's a little bit of the light that is blocked, which I thought was interesting. Now we're getting pretty close. So this is right at 3:07. And now it feels like this thing is taking forever. But it's inching slowly and slowly towards 75%. More photos here, more photos here. You can see the yellowness of it. The edges of this are still looking good. This is at 3:08, almost 3:09. So we're getting very close here. And as you see, as I continue going forward, more and more is getting covered. So this is 3:14, right on the dot when this photo is taken. I would say it's about 80% covered. So this is probably right in the area of what it was when I saw it in 2017. This might actually be a little bit more covered than what I saw then in 2017. This might have been closer to what it actually was when it was 3:07 versus 3:15. Yeah, the next one, 3:15. Yeah, 3:14 right there. That one is more than what I saw in 2017. And at this point now, still not feeling any crazy effects. But as we go forward, you can see from right there to right there to right there, this is at 3:18, just 4 minutes later, starting to get more and more covered and more covered. This is at 3:20, so we were just right there. Now, right around now is where I start feeling any noticeable difference in the light. So you can see it gets more and more covered. This is 3:21, so we're almost there, 3:21:44, almost there. Can barely see it at 3:23:44. Can barely see it at this point now. The environment is really starting to change. And I'll show you that. I mean, this is at 3:23:52. Look at that. You can see how dark it is outside. Now let's compare that to that. This is less than 20 minutes ago. 3:05:45. 3:24:37. Less than 20 minutes later, the entire environment has changed. You can see that light right there on that board, that third board. Look where that light is right now. It's shifted completely within a matter of less than 20 minutes. And at this point now, it's starting to get pretty cold. So best way I can describe it was that it felt as though the temperature dropped to maybe 15 degrees at most. So it was in the mid 60s, maybe. It probably dropped down to 50s, like low 50s. Like it got very cold. And I actually had to go inside and put my sweatshirt back on. And if you looked around you, it almost looked like it was maybe 5, 6 o'clock at night. Like it looked like a dusk, kind of. It looked like there was very heavy cloud coverage, but everything else seemed very clear. It was a very eerie feeling. But let's get into, all right, I kind of blew the surprise right there, but this is 323, 324:37, 324:54. This is the first image that I took of when it was a solar eclipse 100%. I first saw it with my own eyes, then I grabbed my camera and I took these images of it. And you can clearly see coronal mass ejection right there. Lots of solar activity right up here into the top left, maybe between 10 o'clock and 12, if we were looking at this as a clock. Lots and lots of activity up here. It was phenomenal to see, both with glasses on, with glasses off, and through my camera. It was amazing to see this live. Now, I couldn't see any actual movement of the solar flares or anything like that, but I could definitely see them, which was amazing. This is at 324:54. So basically right at 325. Taking more images right here. I mean, you can clearly see that coming right off the sun right there. Now, like I said earlier, if that was pointed at us and it was a little bit more powerful, maybe potentially it could wipe us out. So being able to see that live made me realize just how lucky we are to be on this place and to be able to watch this, especially with my family. I mean, it was amazing. But that's at 324:59. About 4 seconds later, another image, you can kind of see rings around the sun as well. Right there, and then right there, you can see how far that corona actually stretches out, which is amazing. 325:03. Then you can kind of see right here, 327. So this is about 2 minutes later. So I put down my thing and I tried to look at it with my eyes and imprint it into my brain so that I never forget this moment. And you can just see how beautiful that southeastern part of this image right there. To go back to the clock, it's about like 6:30 or so on if this were a clock. But you can see the corona, you can see the different outermost layers of the sun. And this one is one of my favorites because you can clearly see that image right there. So you see the difference. There's that one. And then you clearly see, now I don't know if this is just my camera or if there was actually a shift in this particular coronal mass ejection, the solar flare. I'm not sure, but you can definitely see right here. It is certainly not sticking out as much as it is right here. I mean, that is absolutely amazing to see. You can see all the tiny little ones on the corner right here that are just taking up small little pixels. And then you see that big one right there that is very visible to see, even without the glasses, very visible to see. And at this point right here, once again, it's cold. It's super dark. It's really weird feeling. And I was just in awe. I was like, how the F is this happening? This is an absolutely crazy experience. And then we go forward. This is the final image that I have of it. Just absolutely beautiful. You see that solar flare, the coronal mass ejection just coming off right there. It is fantastic. See the corona, and this is the final image that I took. This was not the end of it. I still looked at it until I could no longer see it. And then it started to brighten up. And then I got on the road and drove to Albany Airport pretty much directly after this to try and beat the traffic. And I did, this is the video that I did take with my cell phone. I had this idea maybe after, I mean, you can see it from the timestamp, 3:30. This is at 3:27, right? So eclipse is over. It's not 100% right here, but, and if you think back earlier in the podcast, that video of that dog with the basically shadows of the sun right there, you can kind of see a little bit of that here as I take a standstill video of the outside right here. So this is at, once again, at 3:30:52. So about 4 minutes after my final picture. You can see the change right here. And I don't know if you can see it, but I'll take right here on the rock is a great, right there. You can see the slivers of the sun right there, just like how in that image of that dog, there's slices. So it's a slice of the sun that you're visibly able to see, especially on that rock right there. And as it goes further and further, it gets brighter and brighter. But you can see those slivers. And that was something, especially on the leaves of the trees. You could especially see it on those leaves, because whatever it was about that green background, it was very visible to see the sliver of the sun kind of growing and growing as time progressed. It was absolutely fantastic, but I'll play this start to finish so you can kind of get an idea of this. You can look at the fireplace as well. Looking at the rocks makes it really easy to see. We see it's slowly getting brighter. You can definitely see the shift of the shadow for sure. I mean, just amazing. All these images right here. Is it getting that much brighter? I mean, my reference point was to look right at this rock. How is that rock changing in brightness? Dark. Look at the blue right there, how blue it is. Then look at the yellowish coloring of it. Very, very cool. Now, this is a video that I took probably maybe about 10 minutes or so. So very cool to see that. Very, very cool. And I am so beyond, I'll put these up on Instagram so that you can see them for yourself as well as soon as I finish recording, because it is absolutely 100% fascinating. But let's get back into this. So one of the things that it also talked about that wasn't included in the history of it, that I think was important in terms of the history of solar eclipses, was this thing that is in Scotland that I really want to go visit now. So it's a 5,000-year-old site that could potentially be the site of the first recorded history of a solar eclipse. Certainly one of the earliest instances of using the stars to match up to a specific grouping of stones. So let's read this. This is from livescience.com. Scientists have statistically proven that two 5,000-year-old stone circles located on islands in Scotland have a variety of astronomical alignments that ancient builders intentionally created. Stone circles are created in such a way as to create alignments between the sun and the stones, along with various landscape features during winter and summer solstices. The circles also align with the moon during a major lunar standstill, an event that happens once every 18.6 years. The summer and winter solstices mark the longest and shortest days of the year, respectively, when the sun is highest and lowest in the sky. When the sun is high up in the sky, it's the longest. When the sun is low up in the sky, it's the shortest. During a major lunar standstill, the next one will occur in 2025, the moon can move through the sky at points that appear very high or very low on the horizon. The two stone circles are located at sites called Callanish, which is on the Isle of Lewis, and Stennis on the Orkney Isles. Consider the first great circles of Scotland. Callanish and Stennis consist of 16 and 12 stones, respectively, wrote Gail Higginbottom, a visiting research fellow at the University of Adelaide in Australia, and Roger Clay, a professor at the Australian National University in Canberra, in an article recently published in the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports. The two researchers noted that by 2,800 years ago, hundreds of stone circles had been constructed in Britain, including the famous example at Stonehenge. The number of these monuments and the fact that they were likely constructed over a far longer time frame than any other megalithic monument type highlights their continual relevance for Neolithic and Bronze Age cultures. Statistically proving it now. Scientists have long suspected that these two stone circles were aligned with the solstices in major lunar standstill. Journal articles published at least as far back as the 1950s have presented possible alignments. Additionally, numerous YouTube videos record possible alignments involving the solstices and major lunar standstills. At Callanish, the last major lunar standstill occurred in 2006. The challenge is statistically proving that these alignments are intentional and not the result of random chance, of course. So, the researchers identified 8 possible alignments involving the solstices and major lunar standstills at Callanish and 6 more possible alignments at Stennes. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly or not, but it's whatever. Also, if you are at Stennis during the major lunar standstill on a day when the moon appears at the highest point on the horizon, the last glimmer of the moon will occur behind one of its stones. Very interesting. The investigators then used a series of statistical tests to try and determine the chances that these possible alignments were nothing but chance. Results show that there was only a 1.25% possibility that the alignments at Callanish were entirely chance and a 3.75% possibility that the alignments at Stennes were due to chance. The calculations also showed that the likelihood of the monuments being astronomical is above 97.87% for Stennes and 97.87% for Callanish, wrote Higginbottom and Clay in their paper. In other words, the alignments were likely not random, and instead the ancient builders intentionally constructed the circles to create alignments with the solstice sun and major lunar standstill, the researchers said. Nobody before this has ever statistically determined that a single stone circle was constructed with astronomical phenomena in mind. It was all supposition. This research is finally proof that the ancient Britons connected the earth to the sky with their earliest standing stones, and that this practice continued in the same way for 2,000 years. So this is not actually specifically saying that this is the first of solar eclipse viewing, but this is more so for the actual looking at the moon as it moves throughout the sky. Obviously, the winter and summer solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year. Imagining those and looking at those in a time when this is even before Stonehenge. So these things are very, very old. And you can read right here, this is the stone of Stennes. You can see right exactly where they are, right on the Orkney Islands in Scotland. See right here. Once again, I'll make sure that I include this all in the description of the video. Now let's go to the first photo that was ever captured of one, which I think is very, very cool. People have observed total solar eclipses since ancient times, but it wasn't until the 19th century that people figured out how to photograph them. One of the most important ways to document this, as opposed to writing it down, is to have photo evidence of it, right? The first photo of a total solar eclipse was taken on July 28, 1851 by Johannes Julius Friedrich Berkowski, who was said to be the most skilled daguerreotypist in the Prussian city of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, Russia. Berkowski was commissioned by the Royal Prussian Observatory at Königsberg to create a still image of the total solar eclipse using the daguerreotype process, in which the image was directly exposed onto a polished copper plate. Very, very cool. And this is the image right here. Very, very cool. Once it was polished to a shiny mirror finish, the silver-plated copper was treated with halogen or iodine fumes that made it sensitive to light. Exposing the copper plate inside the camera would leave behind a latent image or an invisible trace of the photograph. To make a latent image visible, the daguerreotypist would treat the copper plate with mercury vapor in a dark room. Then the daguerreotypist would rinse it off, dry it, and seal it in a glass frame. The final product was a black and white image that was microscopically textured as a result of the silver's exposure to sunlight. Before Berkowski created his famous first daguerreotype of a total solar eclipse, photographers had struggled to capture any decent images of eclipse. Photos were often overexposed or underexposed, and they failed to show the right amount of contrast between the sun's bright corona and the dark disk of the moon. So let's take a look at that again. I mean, beautiful, beautiful image right there. You can definitely see coronal mass ejection, solar flares, all that stuff right here. You can even see the outline of that right there. But is that better than mine? I don't know. I don't know. Is this image that involved using Mercury to create this particular image? Is that better than my, I think it's an iPhone 13, my iPhone 13 camera? Maybe. You decide for yourself. Now, finally, for our final thing, when is the next eclipse going to happen here in America? When is the next total, not partial, but total solar eclipse? All right, so we have a upcoming September 18th, a partial lunar eclipse. You can see right here. This is an amazing website. I really like this. You see right there, boom. Partial eclipse. This is totality right there. That's the most amount that will be covered. So that's not exactly amazing. And that's a lunar eclipse. So that's the Earth's in front of the moon in reference to the sun. So it goes moon, Earth, sun, as opposed to a solar eclipse, which is sun, moon, Earth, or Earth, moon, sun. Then you have a partial solar eclipse, October 7, 2024. Another total lunar eclipse on March 14th, 2025. A partial solar eclipse, which we'll see actually a good amount right here. And once again, this video is absolutely amazing. And then you can kind of see it happens real quick right here. It's not a full one, but it happens very, very quickly. Very quickly. You can see right here, it's going to happen mostly in Antarctica almost. Let's go back right here. Total lunar eclipse, partial lunar eclipse, partial solar eclipse. A lot of partials coming up right here. Going all the way out to 2031. Next total solar eclipse, however, is in 8 years, 340 days. Then an annular eclipse is going to be in 15 years and 57 days. So the next total solar eclipse that will happen in North America is going to be March 3rd, 2033. Good amount of time away, man. Going to be very far away. However, you see where this is happening, right? Right? This is where it's mostly going to be happening, unfortunately. So Alaska is going to be the only place you're going to see the total solar eclipse. All of these other places, not going to see it. So that's 2033 in Alaska. Now, can we say, let's go to Pittsburgh, because I'm here in Pittsburgh. Next total solar eclipse that's going to happen here in Pittsburgh, not visible before the year 2200. Yikes. And then 87 years from now is the next annular eclipse. So in my lifetime, unless I'm moving someplace else, I'm not going to see one here in Pittsburgh. I'm going to have to travel, right? So very, very rare that it's going to happen in the United States, but that does not mean that there is no hope, right? There could potentially be another one in the future. Very, very cool. Total solar eclipse. Look at that. Very, very cool. Very interesting as well. I'm so excited that I was able to have that experience of being able to see that solar eclipse. I think it was important not only for myself, but for many of the people in my life who were also there to kind of explain what was going on. So after I took those pictures, I showed them and I was like, do you know what that is? That's a solar flare. That's a piece of the sun being exploded out into space. And some of those might be pointed towards us right now. And if they were powerful and strong enough, they would wipe us out. But because they aren't, and they haven't been for me and your lifetime, we are still able to live here. But the coldness that I felt, the darkness that I felt when that sun was covered also helped me to understand just how important the sun is and how important all of this stuff that we have here is. Our ability to survive and to live on this planet is because of our sun, and we should be grateful that we live in a particular system that has allowed us to survive this long. And hopefully I'll be here for the next total solar eclipse. I will more than likely travel to another solar eclipse. Hopefully by the time I get to go to my next one, I'm able to be with kids, with my beautiful wife, and I'll be able to extend this experience to them as well. And maybe in another 7 years, I'll be sitting in a different chair, hopefully, in a big, beautiful $10 million house or something like that, explaining to you my next experience with the total solar eclipse. But that is it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please, there's another one that you can go visit, you can go fly to, you can go travel to. It is imperative that you go see it because it's extremely important. Not just important to me, but important to you as well, right? You think so many times that things like this aren't important, but when you see it in person, there's nothing that beats it. Absolutely nothing. You can't describe just how just the entire environment around you changes. It's crazy, right? For those who didn't experience it, it is a once in a lifetime thing. Really. In my lifetime, that particular spot in upper state New York, it's not going to happen there for the rest of my life. That was a once in a lifetime event, and I'm eternally grateful for it. This is the Zach Moore podcast. Thank you for listening.